Imagine walking into a restaurant, expecting to surprise your husband on his big promotion night, only to find him raising a glass to another woman. That's exactly what happened to me. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 years old, and I live in a small town in North Carolina with my husband, David. We've been married for 8 years, and until that moment, I thought we had built a good life together. We had a modest home with a wide porch, 2 dogs, and a routine that felt safe. I trusted him completely. He was the man I thought I would grow old with, the one who promised me forever. David worked long hours at an engineering firm, and although it meant he was gone a lot, I always told myself it was worth it. He was ambitious, smart, and had been aiming for a promotion that would finally recognize all the effort he had poured into his job. When he told me he'd made it to the final round of consideration, I was thrilled. I wanted to do something special for him, something that would show how proud I was. So when the day came and he said he would be out with colleagues to celebrate, I made plans of my own. I put on a dress he'd always loved. The one he said made me look like the woman he fell in love with at first sight. I bought a small gift, a leather watch I knew he had been eyeing for months. My heart was pounding with excitement. I imagined walking into that restaurant, catching his eye, and seeing his face light up with joy. I thought it would be one of those sweet surprises we'd laugh about years later. I drove there rehearsing what I'd say. Something simple like, "Surprise, honey." I couldn't miss this. In my head, I pictured him rushing over to hug me, his co-workers smiling, maybe even clapping as he introduced me proudly as his wife. That's the image I held onto as I parked my car, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the entrance. But instead of finding the man I loved surrounded by friends and colleagues, I saw him sitting at a table tucked away in the corner. His hand was wrapped around a glass, his smile wide, his eyes locked onto another woman's face. She leaned in close, laughing at something he said, her hand resting lightly on his arm like it belonged. In that single moment, everything I thought I knew about my marriage began to crumble. David had always been the kind of man who looked like he had everything under control. To anyone on the outside, he seemed dependable, patient, and hardworking. He helped neighbors when their car broke down. He mowed the lawn on Saturdays, and he was the sort of man who always held doors open for strangers. Friends called him reliable, and even my parents told me how lucky I was to have someone so steady by my side. That was the picture David painted for the world, and for a long time, I believed it too. When he told me he was being considered for a promotion at work, I felt so proud I could have burst. I watched him put in late nights, coming home with tired eyes and files stacked under his arm. He said he was pushing himself harder than ever because he wanted this advancement, and I believed him. I thought his long hours were sacrifices for our future. In my heart, I was rooting for him every step of the way. When he finally said the decision had been made and hinted that he would be celebrating soon, I knew I wanted to make it memorable. I imagined the smile on his face if I showed up unexpectedly, letting him know I was just as excited about his achievement as he was. I wanted him to see how proud I was to be his wife. That night, I chose a restaurant he mentioned more than once, a place he described as perfect for special occasions. I thought it was where he would be celebrating with co-workers, or maybe even his manager. I made plans to walk in with a gift and share the evening with him, thinking it would be one of those warm moments people hold on to forever. But what I found instead was a scene that froze me where I stood. David wasn't with his team from work. He wasn't surrounded by colleagues raising glasses to his success. He was seated at a table meant for 2, his body angled toward someone I recognized immediately. Her name was Rachel Anderson. She lived in the same town as us, a familiar face I had seen at the grocery store, at the farmer's market, even once at a local community event. She wasn't a stranger by any means, though she had never been more than an acquaintance to me. Now, she was sitting across from my husband like she belonged in his life. David's smile was different than the one he gave me at home. It was softer, almost tender, as though he had let his guard down completely. His hand rested near hers on the table, and when she laughed, she leaned forward, their fingers brushing together like it was natural, like it wasn't their first time. I couldn't move at first. The image cut deep, sharper than any words could have. In that quiet moment, the man everyone thought was honest and loyal was showing me a side I had never been meant to see. The sound of their laughter was the first thing that hit me. It was light and easy, the kind of laughter 2 people share when they're completely comfortable with one another. Then came the clinking of their glasses, sharp in my ears, as if the entire restaurant had gone quiet except for my eyes fixed on his hand as he lifted his drink, and that was when I noticed it, the band of gold catching the light. His wedding ring. My wedding ring, too. The symbol of promises he was breaking right in front of me, while another woman leaned in, as if it had no meaning at all. Rachel sat close, far too close for it to be innocent. She tilted her head toward him, her hair brushing against her shoulder, her eyes locked on him like he was the only man in the world. Her hand lingered near his on the table, her body language saying everything I didn't want to believe. She wasn't just another woman. She was someone who knew exactly what she was doing. I stepped forward before I could stop myself, and that's when David noticed me. His glass froze halfway to his lips, his eyes widening like a child caught doing something wrong. The color drained from his face, and for a second he just stared at me, completely speechless. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, stammering like words were suddenly too heavy for him to carry. I waited for Rachel to show even a hint of shame, but instead, she leaned back in her chair with the faintest smirk on her lips. It wasn't nervous or apologetic. It was deliberate, almost as if she had been expecting me. That look was worse than the act itself. It told me she didn't feel guilty. She felt victorious. The restaurant seemed to shrink around me. The sound of cutlery, the low hum of other conversations, all of it blurred together. I could feel eyes on me, though I wasn't sure if anyone else had really noticed. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. My heart wanted to scream, to demand answers right then and there, but my mind was telling me something else. This wasn't the place. This wasn't the moment. I steadied myself, refusing to give either of them the satisfaction of watching me break apart in public. I looked at David, then at Rachel, and without a word, I turned and walked out. Each step away from that table felt heavier than the last, but I kept going until I was outside in the cool night air. My heart was shattered into pieces I didn't know how to put back together. But even in that pain, a small spark of something else began to burn. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was clarity, a quiet, steady thought whispering inside me. I wasn't going to let this end with me as the victim. That night felt endless. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel so tightly that my hands ached. When I finally walked through the door, the house felt different, cold, empty, like the air itself knew something had broken. I sat at the kitchen table, waiting, listening for the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. When David came in, he looked startled to see me awake. He hesitated in the doorway, his tie loosened, his face tense. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet stretched between us until I finally asked the only question that mattered. Why? He ran a hand through his hair, sighing like he was the one carrying the weight. Then, without even trying to deny it, he admitted what I already knew. He said it had happened, that he'd been seeing Rachel. But the way he spoke made my stomach turn. He didn't sound ashamed. He didn't sound sorry. He said it like it was some accident, something that just happened. I listened, numb, as he tried to explain himself. He told me Rachel understood him in ways I didn't anymore. He said she made him feel alive, that she got him in a way I apparently never could. Each word landed like a slap, but I didn't let my face show it. Inside, I was crumbling, but outside, I stayed steady. I wanted to scream at him, to throw something, to demand how he could betray everything we'd built together. But instead, I stayed calm. I knew that anger would only give him more power. So I let him talk. I let him paint Rachel as some savior, as though she had filled some void I hadn't noticed. When he finally stopped, I asked him if he had ever once thought about what this would do to me. He couldn't even meet my eyes. He mumbled something about how he hadn't meant for it to go this far, how things had gotten complicated. Then came the part that cut deeper than the betrayal itself. He looked at me, his voice low, and suggested we take a break. Like our marriage was some project he could set aside and revisit later. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't even ask for another chance. He just wanted space, as though I were nothing more than an obstacle to his happiness with her. I sat there, staring at the man I had trusted with my whole life, and I realized he wasn't mine anymore. Maybe he never had been. My heart ached, but my mind stayed sharp. I wasn't going to cry in front of him. I wasn't going to let him see the wreckage he had left me in. I nodded slowly, holding myself together, and told him we'd see. Deep inside, though, I had already made a quiet promise. If he thought I would simply step aside while he played house with her, he was wrong. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something else entirely. The days after our confrontation felt like walking through fog. My heart was bruised, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. I couldn't stop thinking about her. Rachel, the woman who had slid into my life like she belonged there, the woman who looked me in the eye with that smug smirk. If David thought I would quietly disappear, he underestimated. I needed to know who she really was, so I started small. I asked around town, careful not to sound too curious. It didn't take long for people to talk. Rachel worked in real estate. She was known for her charm, for the way she could talk anyone into trusting her. But there was another layer underneath the polished smile. More than one person mentioned she had a habit of flirting with married men. Some brushed it off as harmless. Others hinted it wasn't just talk. The more I heard, the clearer the picture became. Rachel wasn't new to this. She knew how to weave herself into lives that weren't hers. She thrived on attention, on being the center of someone else's world. even if it meant tearing another woman's apart. Still, gossip wasn't enough. I needed something solid, something that would give me the edge. That's when I stumbled onto the detail that changed everything. Rachel hadn't always been single. She had been married before, years ago, to a man named Mark Evans. I remembered the name faintly, but I had never connected it to her. Mark wasn't flashy like David. He was quiet, steady, the kind of man who kept to himself. He still lived nearby, though he didn't cross paths with many people. From what I could gather, he had once been deeply in love with Rachel. But one day, she simply left. No long goodbye, no final talk, just walked away. At first, I thought it was just another sad story of a broken marriage. But then I heard something else, whispered like a secret. Rachel never finalized the divorce. She had abandoned her husband and moved on to other men, leaving the legal ties untouched. I couldn't believe it at first. Who would do something like that? But the more I dug, the more the rumor held weight. Mark had never remarried. He lived quietly, almost withdrawn, and people said he had never spoken badly about her. He just carried the weight of what she had done. And suddenly, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. If this was true, if Rachel was still legally tied to someone else, then the story wasn't what she wanted the world to see. She wasn't some perfect woman who had stolen my husband's heart. She was someone with secrets, someone who had left wreckage behind her. For the first time since the night at the restaurant, I felt something stronger than pain. I felt possibility. Maybe Rachel thought she had won, but I was beginning to see just how fragile her victory really was. I knew I couldn't rely on whispers alone. If I wanted the truth, I needed to hear it from the one person who would know for certain. That meant reaching out to Mark Evans. Just the thought of it made my stomach twist. What would I even say to him? How could I bring up something so painful without reopening old wounds? But I had no choice. I needed answers. I found his number through a mutual acquaintance who hesitated before giving it to me. He keeps to himself, she warned. Don't expect him to talk much. Still, I dialed. My voice shook a little as I introduced myself, keeping it simple. I told him I wanted to ask a few questions about Rachel. There was a long pause on the other end before he finally agreed to meet me for coffee. When I walked into the small cafe, I recognized him right away. He was sitting by the window, hands wrapped around a mug as if he needed the warmth. He looked older than I remembered, not in years but in weight, like life had pressed heavily on his shoulders. I sat down, and at first his answers were clipped careful. He clearly didn't want to stir up old memories. I tried to be respectful, keeping my tone gentle. I mentioned that Rachel was involved with my husband. That was the moment his eyes lifted to mine, sharp with recognition. "You're David's wife?" he asked, as if the pieces suddenly fell into place. I nodded, and something shifted in his expression. The guarded look faded, replaced with a quiet understanding. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, and for the first time he spoke openly. He told me Rachel had left him years ago, walking out without much explanation. He had waited, at first hoping she would come back, then realizing she had no intention of doing so. But what struck me most was when he said she had never finalized their divorce. She had simply vanished from their marriage, leaving him legally tied to her with no closure. I sat in stunned silence, barely able to process what he was telling me. He explained that he had the paperwork to prove it. He had kept everything: marriage certificate, court filings that were never completed, even letters from when she first left. It was all still there, untouched, because part of him had never been able to throw it away. Hearing him say it out loud made everything real. Rachel wasn't free. She had built this entire new life, chasing after men who weren't hers, while still bound to the husband she had deserted. Mark's voice softened as he looked at me. "I don't know what you're planning to do with this, but I thought you should know the truth. She may pretend she's moved on, but on paper she's still mine." I thanked him, my mind racing. I had come hoping for a crack in her story. What I left with was a weapon strong enough to shatter the image Rachel had worked so hard to create. After that meeting with Mark, I realized I wasn't alone in this mess. He understood what it felt like to be discarded, to have someone you trusted choose selfishness over loyalty. Our stories were different but connected, tangled together by Rachel's carelessness and David's weakness. For the first time since everything began, I felt less isolated. We met again a few days later, this time not as strangers but as two people who shared the same wound. Over cups of coffee, we talked honestly. He told me how Rachel had left him without a word of closure, how he had carried the silence like a weight for years. I told him how I had walked into that restaurant expecting to celebrate and instead watched my marriage collapse in front of me. The pain was raw for both of us, but so was the determination. It didn't take long before our conversations turned toward what could be done. Neither of us wanted yelling matches or petty game. We wanted something sharper, something that would leave Rachel and David with no room to twist the truth. If they wanted to play with people's lives, then they needed to be shown exactly what they had done, and pay for it in a way they wouldn't forget. The idea began to take shape slowly. I told Mark I had been pretending to accept David's excuses. I acted calm, even forgiving, letting him think I was willing to work on things. It wasn't easy. Every time he spoke about needing space or about how complicated life had become, I wanted to scream. But I stayed steady. I nodded, I smiled faintly, I let him believe he still had me under control. Meanwhile, Mark did his part. He started gathering the paperwork, pulling out the files he had kept tucked away for years. There it was in black and white. The marriage license, the incomplete filings, the undeniable proof that Rachel was still legally tied to him. She had walked away, but she had never cut the cord. That paper trail was the key to everything. We talked about timing, about where and how to bring the truth to light. We agreed it had to be public, somewhere Rachel and David couldn't spin it into something small or meaningless. They had both thrived in shadows, sneaking around, thinking no one would notice. The best way to hit them where it hurt was to drag everything into the open. Each step of the plan gave me a strange sense of calm. Instead of drowning in heartbreak, I finally felt control slipping back into my hands. Mark's steady presence reminded me I wasn't weak. We weren't victims anymore. We were the ones who would decide how the story ended. And when the right moment came, we would be ready to strike in a way neither of them could ever forget. Weeks passed, and I kept playing my part. Around David, I stayed calm, quiet, even agreeable. I let him think I was moving past everything, that I was willing to give him the space he wanted. He mistook my silence for forgiveness, and in his arrogance, he invited me to his company's big celebration dinner. He framed it like an olive branch, telling me it would mean a lot if I stood by his side. Deep down, I knew the truth. He just wanted me there to keep up appearances. The night of the event, the restaurant was filled with laughter, polished shoes, and clinking glasses. Colleagues in suits and dresses mingled, congratulating one another. David stood tall, beaming, clearly enjoying the attention. But the real spotlight wasn't on his achievement. It was on Rachel, who swept in on his arm like she owned the room. She didn't hide it. She leaned into him, her smile wide, making sure everyone saw the closeness between them. Every touch, every laugh, was a performance designed to show she had claimed him. I watched from a distance for a moment, letting the scene play out exactly as they wanted it to. David glanced at me once, gave me that confident smile as if he believed I had accepted this new reality. Rachel didn't even bother acknowledging me. She was too busy flaunting what she thought she had won. Then the doors opened again, and I walked in, not alone, but with Mark beside me. He looked steady, composed, and completely unbothered by the eyes that turned toward us. Together, we crossed the room, and I could feel the energy shift. Conversations slowed, curiosity spread. When we reached the center, I cleared my throat lightly. My voice was calm, steady, not raised, but it carried in the silence that followed. "Funny thing about Rachel," I said, my eyes locking on hers. "She's actually still married." To the man standing beside me. The room erupted in gasps, sharp intakes of breath echoing off the walls. Faces turned toward Rachel and then toward Mark, confusion mixing with shock. David's smile collapsed instantly. His glass slipped slightly in his hand, and his eyes darted between the three of us, searching for some escape. Mark didn't need to say much. He simply pulled out the folder he had brought, holding up the papers that told the story in black and white. The marriage certificate, the incomplete filings, the proof that Rachel was not free, no matter how many men she tried to claim. The whispers grew louder, colleagues murmuring, heads shaking. Rachel's face turned pale before flushing with anger, but the smirk she once wore was gone. She looked around as if waiting for someone to defend her, but no one did. David opened his mouth, fumbling for words, but nothing came. His carefully built image was cracking in front of everyone who mattered to him. And for the first time since the betrayal began, I felt no pain, only the deep satisfaction of truth finally laid bare. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the low hum of whispers passing through the room. I watched Rachel's face change in front of everyone. At first, she tried to hold her head high, but her composure slipped. The confident smile she carried when she walked in was gone. Her eyes darted around, wide and frantic, like she was looking for someone to pull her out of the mess. But there was no one. Every person in that room had seen the truth, and there was no hiding from it. Her cheeks flushed red, then pale, and her lips trembled as she tried to form an excuse. No words came. She pushed back her chair so hard it scraped against the floor, the sound sharp in the quiet. Then, without looking at anyone, she stormed out, heels clicking against the tile, her head down. The woman who had smirked at me weeks earlier was now running from the very people she had tried to impress. David stood frozen. His face turned the same shade of red, but unlike Rachel, he couldn't leave. His colleagues, the people whose respect he craved, were watching him. The whispers grew louder, and I could see the shift in their eyes. The man they once thought of as dependable and hardworking now looked small and dishonest. His polished image cracked in seconds, and no smooth words could fix it. He tried to stammer out explanations, his voice awkward and broken, but no one seemed convinced. People turned back to their tables, shaking their heads, some even exchanging pitying glances in my direction. I didn't respond. I stood calmly, collected, and let the silence do the work. That night marked the end for David in more ways than one. Word spread quickly through his company, reaching people beyond the room. A man who couldn't keep his personal life together, a man exposed in front of everyone, was not someone they wanted to represent their success. The promotion he had been chasing slipped out of his hand. Slowly, his opportunities dried up, leaving him scrambling to hold onto a career that no longer had room for him. I didn't shout. I didn't throw accusations. I didn't fight for answers that would only dig the knife deeper. I let the truth settle on its own, because it spoke louder than anything I could have said. My part was simple. I went home, gathered my strength, and filed for divorce. The papers were delivered to him just days later. There was nothing dramatic, nothing drawn out. He tried once to argue, but I didn't engage. I had already made my decision. David was left standing in the wreckage he had created, his reputation gone, his career shaken, and his marriage over. And I didn't feel the need to add a single word to it. The silence between us said more than any confrontation ever could. In the weeks that followed, the house felt quieter than ever. At first, the silence was heavy, reminding me of what had been lost, but slowly it became something else. It became peaceful. Without David's presence, without his excuses and hollow promises, I found space to breathe again. The hurt was still there, sharp at times, but so was something new, strength I didn't know I had. I often thought about how quickly my world had changed. One night I believed I was celebrating my husband's success, and the next I was watching the truth unfold in front of strangers. It could have broken me, but instead it pushed me to stand taller. Betrayal left scars, yes, but it also showed me that I was stronger than the lies I had been fed. Mark and I kept in touch after that night. We didn't see each other every day, but we checked in often. He understood the weight of betrayal in a way few could. When the ache felt heavy, he reminded me that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about moving forward. Sometimes we shared quiet conversations over coffee. Other times we laughed about ordinary things just to feel normal again. We weren't looking for replacements for what we had lost. We were just finding steady ground again, side by side as friends. I could see the change in him too. For years, he had lived in the shadow of what Rachel had done, but now he had finally been given closure. Watching him slowly let go of that weight reminded me that I could do the same. Neither of us needed revenge to define us. The truth had already done the work for us. Filing for divorce gave me more than legal freedom. It gave me clarity. I no longer had to live in a marriage built on lies, pretending to believe in a man who had stopped valuing me long ago. Instead of bitterness, I chose self-respect. Instead of asking, why me? I asked, what's next? I won't pretend the pain disappeared overnight. There were mornings when memories stung, when I caught myself missing the man I thought David was, not the man he had turned out to be. But every day I reminded myself that walking away was not weakness, it was power. It was choosing myself after years of giving everything to someone who didn't deserve it. Looking back now, I don't see myself as the woman who was betrayed. I see myself as the woman who stood tall when the truth came crashing down. I didn't fight, I didn't beg, I didn't lose myself in his lies. I walked away with my dignity intact. And if there's one thing I want anyone listening to remember, it's this. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is letting the truth come out on its own and walking away with your head held high. Because in the end, peace is worth more than revenge, and self-respect is the greatest victory of all.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.